My twin brother died of diabetes in 2019. I was diagnosed with the same condition the same year. Over the last 5 months, I have lost 33 pounds by intermittent fasting and keto diet. I'm off insulin and take no other medication. This man should be nominated for a Nobel Prize. Day 3 of intermittent fasting. I left my wallet at home a few days ago, so I couldn't eat at work, and discovered this world of fasting almost by accident. I've learned I can go 20 hours or more and actually have more energy. That's the paradox most people do not and will not believe. I have gone from almost falling asleep in my chair to having all kinds of energy and focus in the afternoon. Thank you so much for this video. I have taken notes while watching this lecture. I bought a glucometer, but now I realize that it is not a good way of checking. However, I am overweight and I have hypertension. I stopped eating sugar and carbs 8 weeks ago and I have lost 18 pounds. I just started walking with my dogs today. Thank you so much, doctor, for your kindness and truth.
He puts on weight. So the old theory was calories in, calories out. And I'm sure that you all know from my previous talk that that is a whole bunch of baloney. The body will take the 1,000 calories here in that person, and depending on their hormonal status, will burn it off. It'll go to the brown cells, and there's thermogenesis. Brown cells are fat cells that are brown. Their job is to burn energy. So you say, wait a second, you're telling me that the body is just wasting that energy? And the answer is yes. And then this poor fellow over here has no brown cells because he's got a whole bunch of insulin running around in his body. And therefore, he partitions those 1,000 calories straight into storage. And in fact, because he's partitioning it into his fat pads, he's hungry. So he's going to come back for another 1,000 from me. He's going to say, give me another 1,000. He's hormonally different. This fellow here is hormonally different. That's his problem. So all this theory that, oh, well, energy is energy and calories are calories in, calories out, has not worked. Everyone has been saying, eat less, move more, exercise more, burn off calories. And where did it make us go? We became fatter. We became iller. We became more diabetic. We're getting more Alzheimer's, more cancer, more high blood pressure, more dyslipidemia. And that's because our premise was wrong to start off with. If we want to make a dent to health today, we need to change our mind on what's causing us to be sick. It's your hormones. You are hormonally modified Homo sapiens. So let's look at our hormones here. You have anabolic hormones, which are your sex hormones and your growth hormones, and the big elephant in the room is insulin. Then you have your catabolic hormones, which are your thyroid, steroids, and glucagon. Now, although I'm going to make a very simple picture of your hormones, it's quite complicated actually. Because if your insulin levels go up, your growth hormone levels may go down, your sex hormones may go down, your thyroid hormones may go up, your steroids may go up, and your glucagon may go up. Think about it. And you've seen it. Do you know, when I started medical school, I would look at overweight men and women, and I would say, you know, this person looks like Cushing syndrome, high steroids. So what happened? Well, there's something went wrong here. So when the insulin goes high, this side gets heavy. Well, this side must get heavy, so your steroids go up. And that's how you get that typical Cushingoid appearance of the people. And you wonder why all this. And then thyroid. Why are our thyroid hormones going crazy? Today, almost a third of people say, I've got a thyroid problem. It's because the body's trying to bring back homeostasis. And you'll find that so you fix this side, and you will fix this side. And I've done it. We've taken patients and fixed the insulin levels, and guess what? Even the hormones in the thyroid get better. Now, of course, that discussion is beyond the scope of today's talk. But you can understand that there's an intricate connection. When patients get extremely high insulin levels, the sex hormone levels go down. There's an epidemic of this going on. There's advertisements on TV. T levels are low. Get your testosterone levels checked. There is hormonal imbalance in men and women, left, right, and center today. And I'm going to try to convince you today that it's because of that big elephant in the room, insulin. And what modulates your insulin the most is your diet. So my goals today is to, of course, disprove the calorie in, calorie out theory. Antiquated, doesn't work. I'm going to prove to you that it's your hormones. I'm going to prove to you that what makes your hormones go bad was your sugar, your carbohydrates. These are the main drivers of your metabolic status. It's your sugar and your carbohydrates. Not so much of the others, not so much fat, not so much protein. It's the carbohydrates and the sugar. They are the main drivers of your metabolic condition. And it is the high carb, especially the sugar diet. And I'm going to prove to you tonight that it's sugar that's driving atherosclerosis, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, dementia, and likely cancer as well. One root cause of a multitude of problems. And if you look at those problems, those are all man-made recent problems. These are all diseases of modern man. What's modern man doing? He is eating sugar and carbs. So when we look at healthy populations around the world in the past, for example, the Inuits or the Maasai in Africa or the people in the Pacific people, everybody was healthy when they're eating the ethnic foods. Some are eating a ton of meat only. That's all they eat is meat and milk. And they're healthy. They don't get coronary disease. They don't become obese. Then there are populations that only eat carbohydrates. That's all they eat. And they are perfectly healthy also. And then there are people who only eat fish. And they are perfectly healthy also. But when you look at all these populations, you'll say, you need to be on a Paleolithic diet. And they always say, no. Look at those guys there. They eat a lot of carbohydrates. We should be eating all those carbs. So you get terribly confused and you're getting conflicting data on who should be eating what. But if you look at all these diets, you'll notice one thing. It's what they're not eating. And what they're not eating is refined carbohydrates, and they're not eating sugar. So the common denominator in healthy populations, when you go out and look at them, in all the books that I've read, it's sugar and refined carbs. All of them are not eating refined carbs and sugars, and that's why they're so healthy. So let's move on. Let's look at more data. So this hormonally modified human beings nowadays, look what's happening to them. They have a low HDL, high triglyceride. Their waistline is big. Everything's up here. They have high blood pressure, defined at 130 over 85 or more. They have high blood sugar. This is called metabolic syndrome. And what's the best way to get to metabolic syndrome real fast? Just eat a lot of sugar. Eat a lot of refined wheat flour. And then on top of it, just add some polyunsaturated fats, which are found in vegetable oils. And now you have the perfect concoction to become a modern man, a hormonally modified man or woman. I'm just using man as a general term. So let's move on. I'm going to show you some more things. So let's see. What's that got to do with coronary artery disease? Dr. J, you're a cardiologist. So I'm going to go right into this study, which was 2015. It's a recent study. It's called the Euro-Aspire study. And what they did is they said, okay, all these people have had heart attacks. So let's see if they have a problem with glucose metabolism. Because here I am saying that it's all to do with your hormones, and it's mostly got to do with your sugar, and it's your insulin that's out of whack. And that's why you're getting heart attacks. Because after all, that's what I am, a cardiologist. So let's look at the data. 1/3 of the MI patients had diabetes. 1/3. 2/3 had undiagnosed diabetes. That means they came in, they didn't know they had diabetes, they worked them up, and they found that, oh my goodness, he's got diabetes. 21% had brand new diabetes, just discovered. 26% had insulin resistance, which means they had pre-diabetes. And 24% were normal, or what they called normal. But in fact, I put parentheses, that's my parenthesis, they were pre-diabetic. Because how did they diagnose them as being normal? They checked their sugar levels. And sugar levels don't tell you whether you're pre-diabetic or not. I'm going to prove to you that also tonight. So had they done insulin levels on the 24% that were pre-diabetic, which were normal by glucose standards, I bet you 100% of those patients were diabetics. There is no difference between a pre-diabetic and a diabetic. So don't try to feel good about it. Oh, I just got a touch of diabetes. I'm pre-diabetic. I'm not sure diabetic, he's diabetic. So what's driving coronary disease? Dr. J says diabetes is a vascular disease. All patients with MI, at least 76% had glucose dysmetabolism, but they were undiagnosed. Diabetes is the main driving force of vascular disease. Vascular disease is caused by glucose metabolism problems. Of the 24 victims that were deemed normal, only glucose was measured. No insulin levels were done! Exclamation mark. Why? Because we don't measure insulin levels. Well, this is a major shortcoming, and I'm going to show you the data. Had insulin levels been performed, I guarantee you that every MI victim in that group had an abnormal glucose metabolism, that hyperinsulinemia. So let's look at how accurate the glucose measurements really are. So your glucose measurements are an extremely inaccurate method to know whether your carbohydrate metabolism is on or off. Glucose is terrible. It's like if you want to know if your engine is good, it's like looking at the engine and say, yep, I don't see any grease on it, it looks great, this engine's running fine. That's how bad it is to look at your glucose levels. So let's take a look at it. Let's dive right into it. Defining diabetes with a fasting glucose is very inaccurate. 40% of diabetics had a fasting glucose less than 110. Now, where did this data come from? This data came from Dr. Kraft, who unfortunately passed away just a few years ago. Amazing man. He had over 45,000 glucose tolerance tests with insulin levels also. So what he did, he gave you the sugar, then he gave you the blood test, and he did your sugar and your insulin levels. And he did correlations between the two to see whether the glucose is accurate or is the insulin accurate, or what's going on here? He looked at both. Genius, absolute genius. All his data fell on the wayside because, why did it all fall in the wayside? This was in the 60s and 70s. Why? Why didn't this information come out? I'm going to tell you why. It's because we all got onto the fat wagon. When Ansel Keys, my last talk that I gave you all, came onto the scene and said, it's all fats, fats, fats cause coronary disease, all the attention went to fat, and all the attention went away from sugar. So all this data got shoved under the carpet. Government agencies jumped onto the fat wagon as well. That put the nail on the coffin. That's it. So sugar did not get discussed, and that was a crime. That was a crime against the people. So look at this. 40% of diabetics, according to the test that he did, they're full-blown diabetic. But when you look at their glucose levels, they were less than 110 fasting. 20% had a fasting sugar less than 100. So now be my guest. I want you to all go to your family doctors and just ask for fasting glucose. And 40% of you who are diabetic will come back with a level that's less than 110, pat yourself on the back and say, I don't have any diabetes. Do you see my problem? Do you see the problem I have with this? We need an accurate way of knowing whether you're diabetic or not. And fasting glucose is not the way to diagnose yourself whether you have diabetes or not. So for goodness sake, when you look at your blood labs and say, my fasting sugar looks fantastic, it doesn't mean anything. Throw it away. Because you are doing yourself a big disjustice. This is terrible. 60% of glucose impaired tolerance testing patients had a fasting sugar of less than 100. So what that means is either you're going to have glucose intolerance or you're going to have diabetes in the majority of patients who actually have the problem, and the fasting glucose is going to give you a false sense of security, and you must avoid fasting sugars. Next. Now, if it is high, it's helpful. But if it's normal, it is not helpful at all. The next test. So you see how antiquated we are. Look, we're practicing medicine of the 1970s when we look at fasting sugars. It's a crime. Fasting insulin levels. Let's look at fasting insulin levels. Only 16% of diabetics had a fasting insulin level that was high, greater than 30. So even a fasting insulin is not a good way of diagnosing yourself with insulin resistance or diabetes. Okay? So your insulin response to the food is more important, not what's happening at rest. The analogy is, your EKG looks great. Oh yeah, you're fine, you don't have any problem. Is that good enough? No, I go do a stress test. The stress test for your glucose metabolism is to do an insulin glucose tolerance test, where now you drink some sugar water, now tell me what your insulin level is. So let's move on. My insulin level should be nice and low when I eat, when I take in sugar. That's going to tell me what's happening in my body. Let's move on. So this test that I'm talking about is called a glucose insulin tolerance test. You give the sugar water, you do a fasting insulin level, and in this patient you can see it's 8, and then half an hour later it's 59, 1 hour is 61, 30, 13, 7, and 6. So unfortunately it goes on till 5 hours. And it is a gruesome test to do, but it gives you so much information. And look at the second hour and the third hour, total is 43. Normal is less than 60. Insulin peaks at half an hour. This is a normal insulin response. This is how your insulin should go up and come down in a normal person. This is pattern 2, where look, your insulin fasting levels are still normal at 13, nice and low. But what's happening is that your second and third hour blood insulin is now greater than 60. It's at 126. Now, 44% of people who had a normal glucose tolerance test by sugar had this pattern. So what does that mean? Doctor, I went to my doctor. You're right. He told me that my fasting sugar doesn't mean anything, so he did a glucose tolerance test on me. So I drank the sugar water, and he only measured my sugar levels, my glucose levels. And I passed. Aren't I a great kid? And I said to him, you passed your glucose tolerance test? Well, 44% of people with a normal glucose tolerance test actually had hyperinsulinemia. So what? So even a glucose tolerance test is worthless? My answer, yes. Because you may increase your insulin level this much and keep your sugar under control, so you pass your glucose tolerance test. Your partner, massive amounts of insulin, keeps his sugar level under control. The difference is you both managed to pass your glucose tolerance test, but one had a massive production of insulin, the other one did not. It's your insulin response that's more important, because that tells you whether you have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance means that I produce all this insulin, it doesn't do any good to me. My insulin receptors don't respond to insulin. So when I become insulin resistant, instead of needing only 2 cc's of insulin, I produce a bucket of insulin now. Now my sugars are under control. It's taking a bucket of insulin to produce that same glucose response. And then, of course, when you can't produce any more insulin, guess what happens to your sugar level? Now you break through. Are you getting the picture? The sugar level now starts going up when your insulin levels cannot keep up anymore. They are so high. Your poor pancreas is doing overtime and it can't produce any more insulin. That's when your sugar levels will start going up now. And you say, well, now I'm a diabetic. Well, sorry, you've been a diabetic for 10 years. How? Because your insulin levels were high. And when your insulin couldn't handle it, that's when now your sugars went up. This 1970s and 1980s technology must stop today. because you lost an opportunity of 10 years to 15 years to treat patients who are hyperinsulinemic, but you missed them because their glucose tolerance. As a cardiologist in my office is vascular disease. It's microangiopathy in the brain. And you look at the CT scans, it says small vessel disease. What does that mean, small vessel disease? I wasn't born with small vessels in my brain. Small vessel disease is diffuse atherosclerosis in the brain. And it's all caused by the same thing. The same thing that gives you a heart attack gives you peripheral vascular disease. That same thing gives you carotid disease. That same thing gives you a stroke. That same thing causes you to have dementia too. They're all one and the same thing. And I take it a step further, that there's so much data now linking insulin and sugar to cancer. That cancer cells behave totally differently when they're in a situation of high insulin, high glucose. There's a direct correlation between insulin, sugar metabolism problems, breast cancer, and colon cancer. This is unequivocal. This is no, oh yeah, he's just conjecturing. There's data on this. Now, I can't show you all this stuff, can I? But I read on your behalf. And one day I might show you those slides too. So Dr. Stout was a professor. He was in Dublin. He had all this data in the 70s. It all got eclipsed. Why? Because we all jumped onto the high-fat bandwagon, saying that it's fats that causes atherosclerosis, not sugar. To the extent that in 1977, the McGovern report came out. The McGovern report was written by one man who happened to be a vegan, and he also said, oh, yeah, we mustn't eat meat, and we mustn't eat red meat. He had no data. The scientists all got up and said that, hey, this is wrong. We shouldn't be telling the American people to cut down fat when there's no evidence that it is saturated fats that cause coronary artery disease. But because of people like Ansel Keys and everybody else, why were we so high on fats? Well, look, people were dying. We got to do something. If all of you have a complaint and I'm the physician here and I have a policy, then I can rubber stamp I'm going to do something about it. So based on extremely flimsy data, they came out with the food pyramid, which basically vilified fats, and all the attention went on to fats. And of course, then it spawned a whole industry to produce low-fat diets. And by the way, you all carried out all the recommendations. You're such good people. You did. 35% reduction in red meat consumption. On average, 30% reduction in the amount of fats that you took in from saturated fats. All of you did it. And you have to replace that with something. And you increased your intake of carbs. So you all went on a high-carb diet, eating all that bread and wheat products, crackers, potatoes, starchy vegetables, yams and beans and all these things. And your carb intake just shut off. Now, that's okay. Look, I don't have a problem with glucose. And starch is glucose molecules stuck together. My problem is with fructose and sugar. So I'm going to come to that in a second. But what that did, it spawned obesity. So let me clarify something with all of you right now. The problem is with fructose, not so much with glucose. Starch is 100, 200 glucose molecules stuck together. That's starch. So you eat a potato, you're just going to get a lot of glucose into your body, not sugar. It's potato. It's a natural thing. It's got glucose. Glucose will be handled by your body. But if you take too much of it, you will put on weight. But that fat will be healthy fat. It will not be this. And I'm going to show you today that the fats that goes here is generated by fructose. So people around the world who are on a high carbohydrate diet, they didn't get the disease. So I don't mind that all of you went and started eating more carbs. It's the sugar that got you, because there's a combination of sugar and starch that made you overweight. Now, when you get sufficiently overweight, you will become insulin resistant also. But did you know, if you look at all obese people, only about 30% have bad fat. So the others have healthy fat. They're not sick. They don't have metabolic syndrome. They don't have a low HDL and a high triglyceride. They just overweight, but they're otherwise healthy. Those people are consuming too much carbohydrate. So I do put them on a low-carb diet, but for a different reason. I just want them to lose weight because I don't want them to become insulin resistant in the future. And I don't want them to get joint disease. And I don't want them to get high blood pressure. But that's different from the guys who have got this, and I do a biopsy of that. It's full of macrophages. Lots and lots of macrophages, inflammatory cells. Look, fat should be fat. But the fat that is in the viscera in patients who are on a high sugar diet, that fat is full of inflammatory cells. And it produces tumor necrosis factor, interleukin 6, I mean, name it. And these things drive the atherosclerotic process. They have inflammation in their body. Fat itself is not inflammatory, but bad fat is. So I'm going to come to that in a second here. So he said that it's the insulin and dysmetabolic condition that caused by insulin that causes disease, vascular disease. I told you endothelial dysfunction. Smooth muscle proliferation. That's when the arteries get hardening. The smooth muscle proliferates, so the muscle becomes harder, thicker. Lipid deposition. The bad fat, once it's overspilled from the liver, goes to your arteries and now deposits itself in the artery. The bad fats go to your liver, from your liver, go to the liver first, then it goes to the pancreas, then it goes to your muscles, and then gets into the arteries. Then patients with high insulin levels, remember that seesaw I showed you? The growth hormone levels are low. Therefore, there's lack of repair. And they get increased catabolism, which means that the walls of the blood vessels break down. Why? Because they have increased steroids as well. So this whole cascade then causes hardening of the arteries. So diabetes increases cardiovascular risk by 500%, but it appears that it's the insulin level. This is the hidden parameter. It's insulin. Which is why, look, I mean, you go to your doctor and you get your sugars treated. My glucose level is now much better. You still get a heart attack. My sugar levels are better. You still get dementia. You still get a stroke. What do diabetics die of? Heart disease. But you're on 4 medicines. Well, that's a lot of fat good it did you taking 4 medicines for diabetes, but your insulin levels are still high. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, we'll come to the medicines in a minute because there are some diabetes medicines that are better than others. But basically, all of them only scratch the surface. If you really want to get a handle on your insulin, it's your diet. It is your diet. And until we face it, and you're going to get such a bang for the buck just with simply cutting out the sugar and watching your diet. Cut out the fructose. I'm going to show you that in a second. So how did insulin levels get so high in the first place? So my insulin levels, I go to the doctor, my God, they're really high, but I thought I was a good boy. Well, because you developed insulin resistance. So why did you get insulin resistance? Because you're eating too frequently. Oh, because you got to eat 5 times a day, you know. Keep that energy level good. Isn't that the advice you were given? Disgusting. Disgusting advice given by authorities. I want you to all know that you got to take your health into your own hands and stop listening and start thinking. So we are all taught, oh, you got to have 3 meals. Look, listen, I like dietitians, but I totally disagree with everything they say. Is it 3 meals a day, 2 snacks in between, maybe a late night snack? I said, what the hell are you doing? So what happens is your insulin levels go up, and before they get a chance to come down, they're up again. And before they get a chance to come down, they're up again. So all day long, your insulin levels are high, even right before you go to bed. So now your poor insulin receptors are being bombarded by insulin all the time. So what happens when a receptor gets bombarded all the time? It downregulates. It doesn't respond to it anymore. It's pushed all that glucose into the cells also. There's no more room now. Those carriages are full. You can't push any more glucose into the cells. The poor insulin can't do its job. So it says, well, you know what? We had 2 cops pushing all these people into this wagon. Well, just order another 12 cops to come along. Now 12 cops line up and they're all pushing everyone into the... What is this? That's insulin resistance. So what causes insulin resistance? Is insulin. What made too much insulin? You stimulated it too much, too frequently, and now you became insensitive to it. And what made your sugar levels go up so much is 1, eating too frequently. Stop eating so frequently. You're a Paleolithic human being, actually, and your genetics are more than 10,000 years old. So in those days, you were not such a good archer that you could make a hunt and kill it every 2 hours. You probably made a kill, and then you probably didn't eat for another day or 2. That's all you did. You're supposed to feast and fast, but we don't do that anymore. And we have a phenomenal physiology in us for feasting and fasting and repairing. And we don't utilize that all the time. So we feast all the time. And therefore, you became hormonally modified human beings. Also, your sugar intake was massive. Now, some chemistry. Sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. Everyone knew that, right? So sugar is not glucose. Sugar is 50% glucose, 50% fructose. So the body breaks it down. Glucose, I told you, not too bad. Your body knows how to handle it. And glucose is utilized by every cell in the body. So you eat some glucose, let's say you ate a potato. It's going to be metabolized everywhere. A little bit will come to your liver, and you'll produce a little bit of fat from it, but most of your glucose got absorbed in your body. Fructose, on the other hand, cannot be utilized by any cell in your body except the liver. Did you know that? Did you know that liver is the only organ that can metabolize fructose? Your body cannot get any energy out of fructose. The only way you can get energy out of the fructose is have your liver converted to fat. What? You mean sugar becomes fat? How many of you knew that sugar, eating a teaspoon of sugar, or Coke, a can of Coke, or soft drink, I should say, that a can of soft drink will become fat in your body? Did any of you know that? It's amazing that sugar becomes fat in your body, and then the fat can be utilized. But this graphic is missed by parents, school teachers, administrators, politicians, policymakers, industry. Industry loves it. I'll come to industry in a second because they are just as much. All these culprits, all of them are culprits, played the greatest experiment of health in history on the planet Earth. They are responsible for millions of unnecessary morbidities and mortalities. So the fructose, and by the way, high fructose corn syrup, oh, that's such a bad thing, is 55 to 60% fructose, but did you know that it's 40 to 45% glucose? So what is the difference between sugar and high fructose corn syrup? Not much. High fructose corn syrup is 55% fructose, sugar is 50%. So you're getting 5% more fructose. But I want you to know what the politics behind this is. So the Europeans, much smarter than us Americans, right? So what did they do? Oh, we're going to ban high fructose corn syrup. It's so bad for you. And they banned it. And all of us said, oh, look, they're so smart, they did it. But now they are all consuming sugar, thinking that they just did themselves a great favor. Not realizing that sugar is just as bad as fructose. If you want to ban anything, you should ban both of them. But you see, it makes you feel like the government did something for you. That they banned high fructose corn syrup, my government's looking out for me. I'm saying no. That's just a game to show you that they're doing something for you. If you want to ban anything, you should ban sugar and high fructose corn syrup, both. Because there's not much difference between them. And the manufacturer of high fructose corn syrup are absolutely right. There's no difference between sugar and high fructose corn syrup. But yet they lead you all to think that, oh, high fructose corn syrup's a real bad thing. I'm just going to have natural sugar. I'm going to have natural sugar. Now, how many times have I heard that natural sugar is fine? I even have brown sugar, by the way, which is white sugar, but it's got it's brown. Well, who cares whether it's brown or not? It's still sugar. But what they've done is they take some demerara stuff, that brown stuff, and they color it at the end. Did you know that? It's white, and they just color it at the end. But then now you think that, oh man, I don't, I banned high fructose corn syrup. I don't buy any ketchup with high fructose corn syrup. I just, and for my tea, I just use brown sugar now. But what created this? What created this where you feel that one is better than the other, get rid of one? It's ignorance, because we don't realize they're both poisons. Now, which one do you want to die from? Just choose your poison. Do you want to die from sugar or high fructose corn syrup? You're still going to die. Friends, there's no difference between sugar and high fructose corn syrup. They're both deadly. One's got 5% more than the other. So please, we need to broaden our net, not just aim it at one thing and think that, because I no longer consume high fructose corn syrup, I'm oxygen-free radicals. But the number of oxygen-free radicals generated when glucose is metabolized, much less than fructose. So fructose causes reactive oxygen species. And reactive oxygen species, if your own body's endogenous antioxidants are not high enough, you're going to get damage to your mitochondria, damage to your DNA, you get advanced aging. So you want to grow fast? A lot of fructose. And you'll get old real quick. That's what causes degeneration. So fructose does not suppress ghrelin. So when you consume foods that are high in sugar, your fructose portion doesn't even register in your brain. That's why you're hungry still. That's why kids are hungry still. When they eat sugary things, do they ever come and say, I'm so full now? No. But you give them something fatty, they'll be full. They won't eat anymore. In fact, force them. Take a stick of butter next time and say, shove it down your stomach. They can't. They'll eat some butter, but then they're full. But I think that's a great experiment. And then say, but sugar, they've just finished eating, they're going to go eat more and more and more and more. Because sugar doesn't satisfy you. There's no satiation. And fructose bypasses all of that. So you eat fructose, you're still hungry. So there's no balance. There's no checks and balance. You eat fats, you eat proteins, you're going to produce cholecystokinin. You're going to produce leptin. Nothing will happen with sugar. You'll just keep eating and eating and eating. And hepatic fructose, I told you, is metabolized differently, and chronic fructose exposure will promote the metabolic syndrome. This is a slide from Dr. Robert Lustig. See that this name at the bottom here? This fellow here? Amazing. You all should look at his YouTubes. They are amazing. If you want to get into details, I've borrowed these slides from him, actually. So we show here that non-enzymatic glycation, much higher with fructose than glucose. So much more damage done to the body with fructose than glucose. So how many fruits do I eat a day? One, maybe. But I eat berries every day, blueberries, because they have coloring in them. The darker the fruit, the better. So I love blueberries because they give me the fruits that I need, my antioxidants that I need, my anti-cancer medication. All that is built into my blueberries. But you won't see me just chomping down an apple, then an orange, and then a banana, and then a bunch of grapes, and sit there doing my homework with grapes over there. No, you won't see me doing that. Because look, fruits are supposed to be at the fall of the year. For what? They all grow in the fall. Why? Because they're supposed to fatten you up for what? For winter. But no, winter never comes. So we have a fall throughout the year. Fruits are overrated. And when I said that to my dietitian, she almost had a seizure. Because she was promoting 5 fruits a day. I said, you crazy? How can you eat 5 fruits a day? Unless you want to get fat. Unless you want to become hormonally modified. Yeah, be my guest. So this was a fantastic study also done by Robert Lustig, and this was done in kids. Well, and I'm going to have to run real fast because I think we only have another 10 minutes max. But the bottom line in this is they took kids And they gave them the same number of calories, but they took out the fructose and just gave them instead glucose. So the total calories was the same, but only fructose they took out from their diet. And look what happened. The glucose tolerance tests got better, and the insulin levels dropped. The insulin resistance went away. So remember I was telling you earlier on that glucose is not so much of an enemy, except if you're overweight. But if you're looking at your hormone and your metabolism and everything else, it's the fructose that's worse. These kids, the two groups, had the same number of calories. They replaced the fructose with glucose, and look what happened. The insulin levels came down, the glucose tolerance test got better. Who's the culprit? It's the fructose. You want your kids to be healthier? Cut out the juices. Juice is not a healthy food. Fruit juices are poisons, especially for kids. Diet-induced obesity in mice. Oh, this was a great study. So let me tell you, this is fantastic. What they did here is they took mice, okay, and they gave them standard chow. And they looked at their weights. And then they gave them a Western diet, and of course they went really quite fat. And then they gave them a really lot of fats in their diet, lots of it, with carbs and everything else. And they got really bad. So this is not just high fat, it's high fat plus high carb, just a lot of calories. Then what they did is they took the standard chow and they pulverized it. In fact, they took all three and they pulverized it into a fine powder. And now they fed it to the rats, and all of them got fat, no matter what they ate. What's the lesson? Wait, there's something we do, something very similar to this, don't we? It's called flour. It's called bread. So when you eat bread, you pulverize the flour, which is absolutely worthless now. There's a direct correlation from the year 1880 onward, when the incidence of all these diseases I talked about started going up. Why in the year 1880? It's because when the steel mill was invented. The steel mill and the milling process of wheat came about. So what happens is now the glycemic index and the characteristics of our flour is totally different from the flour that bread was made from that Jesus broke over his knees. It was that heavy when he broke bread. So our problem is that we've changed our food and making it into fine powders, refining it because we are modern man is terrible. You want to eat bread, then you make it out of absolute whole stuff. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be hard to cut. And you can maybe eat a slice of it. That's the bread you should be eating. Anything look, avoid flour. I'm just telling you all, avoid flour. So avoid sugar, avoid fructose, avoid flour. And the last thing, of course, is vegetable oils, which I touched upon in my last lecture. So don't eat vegetable oils. If you just did these things, you will be extremely healthy. Avoid sugar, avoid fructose. Avoid fine flour, and avoid vegetable seed oils. Vegetable seed oils made from seeds. That doesn't mean coconut oil. That doesn't mean olive oil, because that's made from the pulp. That doesn't mean butter. It means sunflower seed oil, soy oil, canola oil, all the oils that are manufactured. Those are the ones you must completely avoid. So here, postprandial sugar again. This is insulin and GIP response to refined bread. Look what refined bread does. Shoots up your plasma GIP levels and shoots up your insulin levels. Look at that. Versus more whole grain stuff, whole grain pasta. It has to be whole grain. It won't taste that good. It'll be heavy. It's hard to cook. But everything has to be whole grain. It has to be the way nature gave it to you. Otherwise, don't eat it. The more refined it is, poison. I just showed you the slides. Unless you want to spike in your insulin and your GIP. So excess exposure to insulin is the primary cause of insulin resistance. Too much insulin causes insulin resistance. To bring it down, you got to change your diet. Stop stimulating insulin in your body. And fat cell dysmetabolism also causes insulin resistance. Okay, fine. The liver is the main source of the insulin resistance, mainly caused by fructose, which is found in sugar, of course. So how do you correct this hyperinsulinemia? You must create low levels of insulin. How do you create low levels of insulin? without drugs, you do it through diet and fasting. Now, what do I mean by fasting? I'm going to give my next lecture on fasting and survival. But basically, look, if you're not hungry, don't eat. That's the first thing. Rule number one. Just because it's time to eat, what you mean this clock is the main reason why I eat? Hey, I mean, you got to eat when you're hungry. You got to get out of this mode that I have to eat 3 times a day with 5 snacks. Number 2, try to only eat once a day. Try it. Try it. So the way I tell my patients, look, I'm going to give you a summary of how I tell my patients to do it. Number 1, for 2 weeks, you cut out all these unnecessary carbs and sugars for 2 weeks. So you get used to being on a low-carb diet, and you're not going to get the addiction that you have to sugar. And, because sugar is addictive. So when you stop eating sugar, your dopamine levels are going to go crazy. The same place, like morphine, it goes to the same place sugar goes, and you're going to go through withdrawal. There's no doubt you will go through withdrawal. But you got to hang it out. So for 2 weeks, you cut out all the sugars. So at the end of 2 weeks, all your cravings will be gone. And you're just like a junkie that you take him away from his drugs or alcohol. After a week, he won't crave it anymore. So he won't crave the sugar. So do that for 2 weeks first. Then after 2 weeks, randomly skip a meal here and there. Today, I'm not hungry, skip breakfast. Tomorrow, I'll skip lunch. Friday evening, I was really busy, skip the dinner. Now, have the meal that is socially best for you because you don't want to get kicked out of the house either. But learn to skip meals. You'll realize, my goodness, I didn't die. And when hunger does come, it'll be gone. Hunger never stays all afternoon. Let's say you missed lunch and I got hungry at 2 o'clock. I'll drink a glass of water, or I'll have a black coffee, and half an hour later, my hunger's gone. Because ghrelin, which is what causes hunger, is released by my stomach. It comes in pulsatile modes of half an hour. So it comes 4 times a day through memory. It knows that I've eaten 4 times in the past. So when those hours come, there's a pulsatile increase in ghrelin levels. But over time, the ghrelin kind of stabilizes itself. It goes lower and lower and lower and lower. So ghrelin only lasts for half an hour. Then hunger is gone. And then you'll find the rest of it, oh my God, my hunger went away. Try it. You have to try it. You won't die. Promise you won't. So cutting out meals here and there. Do that for 2 weeks. So now a month has gone by. You still survived. Then you get up one morning and you'll say, this week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm just going to eat 1 meal a day. I'm going to wake up just 1 day a week. Try it for 1 day a week for another 2 weeks. Then go to 2 days a week. And then go to 3 days a week, and you can stop there. Because by then, most of you already start noticing how good you feel, how your sugar levels are better. Maybe you lost weight because your insulin levels will come down. When your insulin levels come down, where's the first place you're going to lose weight? In your belly. Your belly will go down. And because you're doing it not through caloric restriction, you're really doing it through fasting, your hormones are totally different. So let me explain something. If you just cut down on calories, but you're eating 3 times a day, your hormones are very much the same as they were before. Do you get it? So yes, you took in less calories, and maybe you lose some weight, but you're going to feel terrible, you're going to lose muscle mass, and you will gain back all that weight again in about a month or 2. But when you do it to fasting, you're changing your hormones. That's my next talk. That's what I'll talk to you about next time when you come. Your growth hormone levels, your epi levels, your steroid levels, everything is going to change. You got to do intermittent fasting. Now when you lose weight, it's in a different hormonal condition. You will not lose so much muscle mass. You'll have brain-derived neurotropic factor. You'll be smarter, better, brighter. You'll feel better. And you'll lose fat in the right places. And you'll remodel your body. You'll have autophagy. So when you lose the fat, your arms won't hang like this because of the skin. You'll lose the skin together with the fat. You will remodel completely. Different type of weight loss program. Not this cut down on calories. Just starve yourself. You'll be thinking of food all day long. You try what I'm doing, you won't think of food. You'll think you'll, but you won't. So